I burned the mortgage papers myself, 22 years ago, in a little bonfire in the backyard, because my late wife Rosalind said we should mark the day properly, and I never once thought I'd stand in that same backyard watching my son-in-law's hands shake as he told me I wasn't welcome at his rehearsal dinner. My name is Walter Doyle. I'm 63 years old. I've spent 40 years running a commercial print shop on Delmar Avenue, and 3 days before my daughter's wedding, my son-in-law-to-be looked me in the eye in my own kitchen and told me the caterer had concerns about how I'd look standing next to his business partners. I said fine. I said it real calm, the way you say something when you've already decided what you're going to do next. Then I went out to my truck, sat there in the driveway for a minute, and made one phone call that ended that wedding before it ever started. Before I get into it, tell me where you're watching from tonight, your city, your state. I read every one of them. And if you're new here, welcome. Some of what I share gets shaped a little for the telling, but the truth underneath it is real, and I think you'll feel that. The thing about my hands is they never fully came clean, not in 40 years. Printer's ink gets down in the creases and stays there, a gray-black stain that no amount of scrubbing lifts all the way out. I used to think that was something to be ashamed of, standing next to men in clean suits at my daughter's school functions, folding my fingers into fists so nobody would look too close. Rosalind used to take my hand in both of hers at the dinner table, right in front of company, and say, "These are the hands that put a roof over this family," and she'd say it like a challenge, daring anybody at that table to think less of me for it. She's been gone 6 years now, ovarian cancer, diagnosed in March, gone by October, and I buried her on a Tuesday and opened the shop again on Thursday because the Hendricks account needed their catalog proofs, and grief doesn't pay for toner. My daughter's name is Marisol. She was 24 when Rosalind died, already out of the house, already building her own life in Charlotte doing marketing for a regional bank, and she came home for the funeral and stayed a week and went back to her apartment and her boyfriend at the time, a fellow named Trent something, who I never much cared for and who thankfully didn't last. 2 years after that, she met Preston Ashcroft at some networking mixer downtown, and within 4 months, she was telling me over the phone that he was the one, that he came from a good family, that his father owned 3 car dealerships across 2 counties, and his mother sat on the board of the symphony. I said, "That sounds wonderful, sweetheart." And I meant the part where she was happy. I met Preston for the first time at a dinner Marisol arranged at a steakhouse I couldn't have afforded to eat at twice a month. He shook my hand with a grip that was trying too hard to prove something. Looked down at it before he did, the way people do when they've heard a warning ahead of time, and said, "Mr. Doyle, Marisol's told me so much about you. You run a print shop. That's fascinating. Real hands-on work." He said, "Hands-on, the way you'd describe something in a museum." I let it go. You let a lot of things go the first time you meet somebody, because you want your daughter's happiness more than you want to be right about a feeling in your gut. The engagement happened at a vineyard in the foothills, photographed by a professional, posted within the hour. 300 likes before I even saw it because Preston's mother Georgette had shared it on her own page first with a caption about her son finding his perfect match. I called Marisol to congratulate her. She was crying, happy tears on the phone, and I was glad for that, genuinely glad, and I told her so. The wedding planning started 2 months later, and that's when I first heard the number. Marisol and Preston came to my house for Sunday dinner. I still made the pot roast, Rosalind taught me, the one dish I could do without a recipe card, and over dessert, Preston laid out a folder on my kitchen table like he was presenting quarterly earnings. The venue was a restored plantation house outside the city, $28,000 for the space alone. Catering ran another $32,000, a tasting menu with a wine pairing designed by a sommelier Georgette had personally recommended. Flowers, $22,000, orchids flown in refrigerated because the local varieties, in Preston's words, didn't photograph with the same depth. A 12-piece band, a photography and videography package with a same-day highlight reel for social media, string lights strung through 600 yards of oak trees. All told, it came to just under $115,000. I want to be honest about what went through my head. I thought about the shop, about 40 years of running presses and negotiating paper costs and training apprentices who left for bigger companies the moment they'd learned enough to leave. I thought about the fact that I could afford it, that I'd built something solid enough to absorb a number like that without going under, And I thought about Marisol's face when she was 7 years old, and I taught her to run the small offset press in the back room. How proud she'd been, ink on her fingers just like mine. I said I'd think about it. Preston smiled the way a man smiles when he already knows the answer, and 3 days later I signed the contracts. Every single one. At the venue, at the caterer's office, at the florist, at the band's agent's storefront downtown. My signature. My accounts. My name listed on every document as the responsible party, the one the vendors would come after if something went wrong. I didn't understand yet what that word meant on paper. I understood it meant I was paying. I didn't yet understand it meant I was holding every key. What I didn't anticipate, the same way you don't anticipate weather that's already 3 counties over, was Georgette. Preston's mother started calling my house directly about 6 weeks into planning, always with a suggestion that sounded like a question but wasn't. Wouldn't it be simpler if the invitations went out under both families' names but listed the Ashcrofts first, given their standing in the community? Wouldn't it make sense for the seating chart to put my side of the family, my brother Elton, his wife, a few cousins from out of state toward the back, near the kitchen doors, since they wouldn't know many of the other guests anyway? Wouldn't it be easier if I just handed the final budget decisions to her events coordinator, since I was so busy with the shop? I said yes to all of it. Every single time. I told myself I was being generous, that this was Marisol's day and not mine, that a father steps back and lets his daughter's new family take the lead. Rosalind would have called that what it actually was, which was me letting a woman I'd met 4 times rearrange my daughter's wedding and my daughter's family tree, like I was a line item she was trying to minimize. I have a friend, Curtis Bellamy, who's run the hardware store 2 doors down from my shop for going on 30 years. Curtis and I eat lunch together most Thursdays, sandwiches from the deli on the corner, and somewhere around week 7 of the planning he set his sandwich down and looked at me and said, "Walt, you've mentioned that woman's name 11 times in the last 20 minutes, and you haven't said one thing about what your own daughter wants." I didn't have a good answer for that. I told him it was temporary, that once the wedding was over things would settle back to normal. Curtis said temporary things have a way of becoming the only way things are done, and I heard him. The way you hear a smoke alarm you've decided is probably just the toast burning. 3 days before the wedding, I got a text from Marisol asking if I could come by the rehearsal dinner venue early, before the actual rehearsal, to go over the seating one more time. I drove over that Thursday afternoon, still in my work clothes because I'd been at the shop all day running a rush order for a client who needed 4,000 brochures by morning. Ink on my forearms, the particular gray dust that settles into your clothes from handling paper stock all day. I walked into the private dining room at the restaurant they'd booked, and Preston was already there with Georgette, going over place cards laid out on a long table. Preston looked up when I came in, looked at my clothes, and something in his face did a small, quick recalculation. "Mr. Doyle," he said, "glad you could make it." Then, before I could say anything else, he said, "Actually, can we talk for a second? Just the 2 of us." He walked me out to the restaurant's back hallway, near the kitchen, and he had his hands in his pockets in that way people do when they're trying to look casual about something they've rehearsed. "Look," he said, "this is a little awkward, but my business partners are going to be here tonight. Guys I'm hoping to bring into a deal. I'm structuring, and some of them are pretty image conscious, and he paused, glanced down at my hands, at the ink still worked into the skin around my knuckles. "I just think it might be better, for tonight specifically, if you sat this one out. We'll obviously want you at the actual wedding, but tonight's more of a professional networking thing dressed up as a rehearsal dinner, and I don't want anything to distract from the pitch I'm making." I stood there for a second. I want to tell you that I felt rage, something hot and immediate, but what I actually felt was something colder and stranger, a kind of clarity, like a fog lifting off a windshield all at once. I looked at this young man, 31 years old, who I had personally handed $115,000 to make possible, telling me that my hands, the same hands that had built the business that was paying for his networking dinner, were a liability he needed managed. "Fine," I said. My voice came out steady, and that steadiness surprised me more than anything else that night. I turned around and walked back through the dining room, past Georgette rearranging place cards, past my own daughter who was just coming in through the front door in a sundress, laughing at something on her phone, not yet knowing what her fiancé had just said to her father 20 feet away. I didn't stop to explain. I walked out to my truck, sat in the driver's seat, and looked at my hands on the wheel for a long moment. Then I picked up my phone. Before I tell you what that call started, drop the word ledger in the comments so I know you made it this far, because what I did next wasn't loud, and it wasn't fast, and it wasn't anything close to what anybody in that restaurant expected from a 63-year-old man in ink-stained coveralls. A quick note, some details here are shaped for the telling, and if this kind of story isn't for you, this is a fair place to step away. The first call I made was to Denise Okafor, who's managed the event side of the Ashford Manor estate, the plantation house venue for 14 years, and whose company fleet of delivery vans I've done all the printed signage and directional materials for since she opened the place. We'd built a relationship over those years the old-fashioned way, on trust and repeat business, and neither one of us ever needing to check the other's word twice. "Denise," I said, when she picked up, "I need to talk to you about Saturday." She could hear something in my voice, because she asked right away if everything was all right, and I told her, no, not exactly, and I laid it out plainly. I was the sole financial guarantor on every contract for this wedding. I had just been told, 3 days out, that I wasn't welcome at the rehearsal dinner because my appearance might embarrass the groom in front of his business associates. I wanted to understand what my options were. Denise didn't hesitate. "Walter," she said, "I've seen contract disputes for 14 years running this place, and what you're describing is a breach on their end, not yours. You didn't fail to perform. They excluded the person financing the event, which puts you well within your rights to pull your guarantee on anything not already rendered." She told me the deposit, $18,000, was gone, non-refundable, already spent on staffing and preparation. But the remaining balance, the day of services, the setup crew, none of that had been executed yet. I could still cancel it. "Cancel it," I said. "Consider it done," she said. "I'll have my team begin unwinding the arrangements first thing tomorrow." I called the caterer next, a company called Magnolia Table, and reached their after-hours coordinator, a woman named Priscilla, who walked me through exactly what could still be pulled back. The wine pairing, the tasting menu ingredients already ordered, a good deal of that could be redirected before final prep began. I asked her to hold everything until morning. Then I called the florist. The orchids were already in refrigerated transport, scheduled to arrive at the venue at 6 the next morning, and the shop's night manager told me they could redirect the delivery to a different address if I could send written authorization before midnight. I thought of my church, Mount Carmel Baptist, and Pastor Adrian Whitfield, who I'd known for 9 years since the shop printed all their Sunday programs and event flyers at cost. I called him, and he said, without a second's hesitation, "Walter, bring them by whenever you can. We'll find good use for them. We always do." I emailed the redirect authorization at 11:40 that night. The band's agent had a strict 72-hour cancellation window, which I'd missed by a matter of hours, so I left a message accepting whatever penalty applied. By midnight, I had unwound or redirected every single service attached to a wedding that, 3 days earlier, I had signed my name to make possible. I still had 2 more calls in me. The first was to my daughter. I want to be honest with you, I almost didn't make it. I sat in that truck in my own driveway for close to 20 minutes with my thumb over her name in my contacts, because some part of me still wanted to protect her from what was coming, the way you want to protect a kid from a fall you can see happening in slow motion. But Rosalind used to say that protecting somebody from the truth isn't love, it's just delay. And eventually, I called. "Marisol," I said, when she picked up, sounding surprised to hear from me so late. "Dad, is everything okay? I need to tell you something, and I need you to just listen before you say anything," I said. I told her what Preston had said to me in that hallway. I told her, plain and without embellishment, what I'd spent the last 3 hours doing. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, long enough that I thought the call had dropped. "Dad," she finally said, her voice very small. "Are you sure? Are you sure that's what he meant?" "I'm sure, sweetheart," I said. I was standing right there. She didn't say anything for a while. Then she said, "I need to go," and hung up, and I didn't know, sitting there in my driveway, whether she was going to go confront Preston, or go cry alone, or go pretend none of it had happened. I only knew I'd told her the truth, and what she did with it after that was going to be her choice to make, the way it should have been all along. My second call went to Curtis. He answered on the first ring, which told me he hadn't been asleep, "I need one more thing," I told him, and he said, "Name it." I explained I'd need somebody to help me haul back whatever food and flowers I could recover before the situation got out ahead of me. And Curtis, God bless him, said, "Give me 20 minutes and I'll bring the truck with the trailer hitch." I woke up the next morning, Friday, having slept maybe 3 hours on the couch in my shop office. And by 6:30, Curtis and I were at the catering facility loading crates of ingredients that hadn't yet been transformed into $115,000 worth of food. Nobody was going to eat under that particular roof. We drove everything to Mount Carmel, where Pastor Whitfield had already gathered half a dozen volunteers, expecting nothing more than the orchids I'd mentioned and getting. Instead, enough raw ingredients that the church decided to throw together an impromptu Friday night fellowship dinner for anybody in the congregation who wanted to come. I watched an elderly woman named Miss Odetta, who'd been coming to that church longer than I'd been alive, take a plate of food that had been destined for a plantation house rehearsal dinner and say, quietly, to nobody in particular, "The Lord provides in strange ways sometimes, doesn't he?" I didn't go to the wedding. I want to be plain about that, because I know some of you are wondering whether I softened at the last minute, showed up anyway, made some grand entrance. I didn't. I'd made my decision Thursday night in that truck, and I didn't change it. I spent Saturday morning at the shop, running the Hendrix brochures that had been waiting since before all this started, because the work doesn't stop just because your heart's cracked open a little. Everything I know about what happened at Ashford Manor that day, I heard secondhand, mostly from Curtis, who I'd asked to drive out and simply observe, the way you'd send somebody to check on a storm you weren't standing in yourself. He got there around 9, parked where he could see the main entrance, and called me every 20 minutes or so with updates. Guests started arriving around 9:30, Curtis told me, and within the first hour, it was clear something was wrong. No caterers had shown up to begin setup, no florist truck, a wedding planner, hired separately by Georgette and unaffected by anything I'd done, was on the phone frantically trying to locate the vendors, only to be told, one after another, that the accounts had been closed and the services canceled as of the previous evening by the financial guarantor of record. By 10, Curtis said, Preston was visibly panicking, pacing near the entrance in his tuxedo, on his phone with what sounded like the venue's general manager. Georgette had arrived and was standing very still in the parking lot, the particular kind of still that Curtis said looked like a woman doing very fast math in her head and not liking any of the answers. Marisol arrived around 10:15 in her wedding dress, and Curtis said she didn't look surprised, not the way Preston and Georgette looked surprised. She looked, in his words, like a woman who'd spent the whole night thinking and had arrived at some kind of decision of her own. Here's the part I didn't expect. Marisol had, apparently, spent the hours after our phone call not sleeping either. She'd gone to Preston that same night, after I called her, and confronted him directly about what he'd said to me. According to what she told me days later, he hadn't denied it. He'd tried to explain it away, said something about optics and his business partners and how it was only for one night, and Marisol had realized, standing in her own kitchen at 1 in the morning, 3 days before her wedding, that this was who he actually was when he thought nobody important was watching. She still went to the venue Saturday morning because she said some part of her needed to see it through to be sure, needed to stand in that building and watch it fall apart to know for certain she'd made the right call. When she arrived and found the wedding effectively dissolved before it began, guests standing around, confused, no food, no flowers, a groom coming apart at the seams in front of the very business partners he'd tried to impress, Curtis said she walked calmly up to Preston in front of everyone and said, loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear, "You told my father he wasn't good enough to be in the room with your business friends, so I decided you weren't good enough to be in a room with me." Then she took off the veil, handed it to a stunned bridesmaid, and walked to her car. The story didn't stay contained to that parking lot. One of the groomsmen, apparently disgusted by what Preston had said about me, word travels fast among wedding parties, and Preston hadn't been as discreet about his reasoning as he thought, had already posted about it on social media before the morning was even over, not naming names at first, but describing enough specifics that people in their shared circles put it together within hours. It picked up traction locally, then regionally, the way these things do when there's a clean villain and a sympathetic detail that people can hold on to. The detail that stuck, more than anything else, was the print stains. Somebody had commented that the groom didn't want his own future father-in-law at his rehearsal dinner because of ink stains from an honest 40-year career, and that comment got shared more than anything else in the whole story. Preston's business deal, the one he'd been so eager to protect, collapsed within the month. I heard through Curtis, who heard through a fellow at the Rotary Club, that the partners he'd been courting had gotten wind of the story and quietly withdrawn, unwilling to be associated with a man who'd shown that kind of character under pressure. Wedding aside, Georgette's name came up in a few less charitable retellings too, given her role steering the whole planning process toward exclusion, and I heard she stopped attending certain social functions she used to frequent regularly, at least for a while. I didn't feel triumphant about any of that, and I want to be honest with you about that too. What I felt was something quieter, more like the particular exhaustion you feel after finally setting down something heavy you'd been carrying without realizing how much it weighed. Marisol came to see me the following Tuesday. She sat across from me at my kitchen table, the same table Preston had once spread his budget folder across like a business proposal, and she cried for a long while before she could get words out. "I'm so sorry, Dad," she kept saying. "I let it go on so long. I saw the way he looked at your hands, and I didn't say anything. And that's on me too." I told her what I believe to be true, which is that you don't always see clearly what's happening while you're inside it, and that the fact she'd walked away the moment she understood it fully mattered a great deal more than the months it took her to get there. I told her about her mother, about the way Rosalind used to hold my hand at dinner tables in front of people who might have judged it, and how I hoped Marisol would remember that a person's worth was never once measured by what was ground into the creases of their skin from honest work. 6 months later, she introduced me to somebody new, a school teacher named Julian who taught shop class at the local high school and had wood stain permanently worked into his own hands from building furniture on weekends. And the first thing he did when we shook hands was turn mine over and ask what press I ran, because he could tell from the calluses I worked with my hands too. I liked him immediately. The print shop's doing better than it ever has, if you're wondering. I put the money I would have spent finishing out that wedding into a new digital press line I'd been eyeing for 3 years, the kind of equipment that let us take on contracts we'd been turning away for lack of capacity. Curtis still comes by most Thursdays for sandwiches, and he still doesn't let me get away with much, which I've come to understand is exactly what a real friend is for. I think about that hallway sometimes, the one outside the restaurant kitchen, and the particular look on Preston's face when he glanced down at my hands before he asked me to disappear for the evening. I've come to believe that the people who need you to hide the evidence of your own hard work so they can look successful to somebody else were never actually proud to stand beside you in the first place. Dignity isn't something anybody else gets to hand you or take away. It's something you carry, the same way I carry the ink that never quite washes out, and no amount of somebody else's shame can burn that away. If this story found you at the right moment, if you've ever been the one paying for a seat you weren't welcome to sit in, I hope you hear this the way I needed to hear it myself. You don't have to wait as long as I did. Tell me where you're watching from. Share this with somebody who needs to hear it tonight. And if you haven't yet, the subscribe button's right there waiting. Every story on this channel started the same way mine did, with somebody finally deciding enough was enough. Thank you for staying with me until the end.